Welcome back to the final segment of Season 1, Episode 6 of the Hockey Hotbed. Thank you for joining us here as I'm running down my Central Division previews. We talked about the bottom four teams in the Central Division, at least in my opinion, the bottom four teams in the Central Division. Now I want to talk to you about who I think are going to be the top four teams in the Central Division and previewing what I believe their seasons are going to be looking like. Now, I want to start off this segment with a team that a lot of people will put in the bottom and a lot of people will put as the 2021 offseason MVPs, and that is the Chicago Blackhawks, at least on the ice. We don't need to get into off the ice right now. We all know how awful that situation is right now. But on the ice, the Chicago Blackhawks probably made the most impressive additions. Defending Vezina Trophy winning goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury is probably the biggest one. And by probably, I mean he is the biggest addition for them. They were also able to add a really good young defenseman in Jake Bean from Carolina. They brought in back-to-back Stanley Cup champion Tyler Johnson, taking advantage of the Tampa Bay Lightning situation and the fact that they could not retain that entire team. They get Tyler Johnson, who is probably going to be a middle six guy. If he's not a top six guy for the Chicago Blackhawks, he will be at the very least a middle six guy and a great third liner for them. And then, of course, they swung the big deal around draft time to acquire Seth Jones from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Paid a lot for him. Paid a massive price tag for him. And then signed him to a massive price tag. Probably a little bit of an overpay. But Seth Jones, while the analytics community and most of the hockey community see him as overrated, while he might be, he very well might be, and I do agree with those guys, I still think he's a really good defenseman. He's one of the better defensemen in the league. He's not bad by any stretch of the word. So adding a good defenseman like that is going to help the Chicago Blackhawks. Say what you want about him. He is probably a little too overrated. He's probably, they overpaid for him. But when you look at adding Seth Jones and subtracting a guy like Duncan Keith, subtracting a guy like Brent Seabrook, well, yeah, the legacies don't match up. The current day skill does. And Seth Jones is probably better right now than those two are right now. I feel like that's a safe bet. So a good addition there for the Blackhawks in Seth Jones. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why are you buying into this, Nick? Why do you think the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be all that? And I don't. I don't think they're a Stanley Cup contender. I don't think they're a playoff shoo-in. I'm not even comfortable saying that I was confident as them as the fourth best team in this division. But when I look at the other teams, when I look at the St. Louis Blues, when I look at the Dallas Stars and how they remained stagnant after one missed the playoffs and one barely made the playoffs only to get embarrassed in the first round, and then I look at what Chicago added with Fleury, with Jones, with Bean, with Johnson, with Jonathan Toews. Let's not understate the fact that this team played without their captain last year. And you can say what you want about Jonathan Toews, about how he's overrated. I'm starting to get the sense that a lot of the players on this team are looked at as overrated because Fleury's in that boat as well. Jonathan Toews is a hell of a hockey player and will instantly be the top line center for the Chicago Blackhawks upon returning. He is a great hockey player. And you add him, plus his knowledge, his experience, to play with some of these young stars, that is going to be a massive boost for the Chicago Blackhawks. And then also goaltending is everything. Marc-Andre Fleury, year to year, it's a different story for him, it seems. Last year was a Vezina Trophy winning season. Does that mean this year is going to be good? It doesn't. Does that mean this year is going to be awful? It doesn't. But it does mean that they still added a good goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury. And behind him, they have a 26-year-old goaltender named Kevin Lankinen that's also pretty darn good. So the Chicago Blackhawks have one of the best goaltending tandems in the Central Division. They have some of the most experienced superstars in the Central Division in Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. Lest we forget, Patrick Kane was the ESPY's Hockey Player of the Year, which was a farce, which made no sense. But he did have a good season last year. I will give it to him. Underrated season for Patrick Kane. But looking at those two guys, Kane and Toews, it's a story as old as time. There's a reason they have 3 Stanley Cups between them. Understandably, how long ago is too long ago when you look at Stanley Cup resumes? It's been 6 years for the Blackhawks. The only holdovers from those teams are on the screen right now. It's Kane and Toews. Now, two of the more important players, 2 of the best players on that team. But do I think this team is going to be good? Yes, I think this team is going to be good. They have the goaltending. They improved defensively. And more importantly, offensively, they're pretty dangerous. You have the 2 guys that I've mentioned several times, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They're pretty dangerous on the offensive zone. Adding Tyler Johnson is not a joke. Alex DeBrincat had probably the most underrated season of anybody last year. He had a great season for the Chicago Blackhawks. 32 goals and 56 points in 52 games. He was over a point a game player. Not talked about nearly enough. So yeah, they have DeBrincat. They have a guy like Dylan Strome. They have guys like Dominic Kubalik, Kirby Dach, if he can take a step forward. This team is going to be a good team, and it's not just because they added Marc-Andre Fleury and Seth Jones. Honestly, if you ask me what the most important addition for the Blackhawks was this offseason, and there were a lot of them, it is Jonathan Toews. If he can come back and he can play healthy and play the way that we know Jonathan Toews to play, that is what's going to propel this team, in my opinion, to a top 4 spot in that division. Now, I want to keep it rolling here because I talked a lot about the Chicago Blackhawks there. I got on a soapbox a little bit. But there's another team I do want to get on a soapbox on. That's a little bit later. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the Minnesota Wild because I think they're also a top 4 team in this division. The Wild finished 3rd place in a weak Pacific Division last year. That does not mean I think the Minnesota Wild are weak at all. Because I think the Minnesota Wild are a pretty darn good team. I think they're missing a couple pieces. I think there's a couple holes in that lineup that could get exposed at some points this season. But if I'm looking and making tiers out of the Central Division, I think the Minnesota Wild sit in that 2nd tier. There's 1 team in the top tier. There's 2 teams in the 2nd tier, and one of them are the Minnesota Wild. The other I'll talk about in a second. They surprised pretty much everybody with how good they were last season. A lot of it helps too the guy they just signed back, Kirill Kaprizov, who's the new face of the franchise, and he's going to lead them again this year to probably another good season. They're also going to be helped by a couple more young players. He has reinforcements coming in the form of Matthew Boldy, in the form of Marco Rossi. They should make a difference this season for the Minnesota Wild. Now, when you look at the Wild, the big thing that they revamped over the offseason was their defensive side of the puck. Their blue line. They added 3 guys. They're going to play pretty much the entire season. And they're hoping for good seasons. They added Jordy Ben. They added veteran Alex Goligoski. And they also added John Merrill. Those are pretty good additions for Bill Guerin and the Minnesota Wild. You have those guys, and it joins Captain Jared Spurgeon. Adds with Jonas Brodin, Matt Dumba, and Dmitry Kulikov. I mean, that's a pretty decent defense right there. That's a defense that's going to be able to get it done in the Central Division, in my opinion. The big knock on the Minnesota Wild has always been their center depth. And it's still not there. It really isn't. It's going to be a big help if they can get Marco Rossi to play right off the bat. I don't know if that's what their plan is. But I think Marco Rossi this year is going to win the Calder. The last time that a team has put up back-to-back Calder Trophy seasons from two different players, obviously, were back in 1967 and 68, I believe, with Bobby Orr and Derek Sanderson for the Boston Bruins. I think that happens this year. Kirill Kaprizov won the Calder last year. I think Marco Rossi goes out and wins the Calder this year because of how important it's going to be for him to succeed for that team. He's a center prospect on a team that needs centers. When I look at this, they have one top tier center, and I put that in quotes because I like Joel Eriksson Ek, and they signed him to a big contract, so he's going to have to produce. I mean, 8 years, 5.25 a year, that's a big commitment by the Wild for Joel Eriksson Ek. And he's the best center on their roster, so why not make that commitment? In this offseason, Bill Guerin had 3 huge names to sign: Kevin Fiala, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Kirill Kaprizov. He committed to Joel Eriksson Ek big time. Makes sense. They don't have any other centers, really. Signs Fiala to a 1-year, basically bridge deal, and signs Kaprizov to a 5-year, pretty much bridge deal, but eats up a couple UFA years. I think Guerin did a really good job keeping this team with where they were at last season and hoping that the young guys can come in, supplement the scoring that they have, and let that team take a step forward this year. A big question mark to me, though, is still going to be in net. Can Cam Talbot repeat what he did last season and be sturdy? Can Kaapo Kähkönen take strides forward, become a more integral part of the Minnesota Wild? Those are going to be the big questions. But if those questions come back a solid, yeah, it's good. And if Marco Rossi and Matthew Boldy can step up, I could see this team making a lot of noise. As of right now, I see them as the 3rd best team in this division. The 2nd best team in this division to me is the Winnipeg Jets. And it takes a little bit. If it wasn't for how good the Colorado Avalanche were, I would put the Winnipeg Jets first. I'm in absolute awe of this team right now, of what they could be. This team is my dark horse Stanley Cup pick. The week of the regular season, in a couple weeks here, I'm going to give my Stanley Cup predictions. This is my dark horse Stanley Cup pick right here. Might not be my official prediction, but this is a team that I could definitely see making a deep run this year. Mostly thanks to the guy on the screen right now. And if you're listening to the podcast version, the guy on the screen is the goaltender for the Winnipeg Jets, Connor Hellebuyck. The guy is Vezina caliber every year. It is Connor Hellebuyck, Andrei Vasilevsky. Those are the 2 best goaltenders in hockey right now. Then there's a bit of a drop-off. Then there's the rest of the league. These 2 guys are the 2 guys that are consistently going to come in and year out right now and be Vezina caliber every season. The problem with the Jets in years past is they haven't had the defense around him. They've had great offense and great scoring depth. They've had great goaltending because of him, but they were not able to surround Connor Hellebuyck with a good defense. This offseason, they helped address that a little bit, adding Nate Schmidt, who I think is primed for a bounce back after a bad year in Vancouver, I think he'll be much better, and I think his transition game is also going to help the Winnipeg Jets. And they also added a bruiser and Brendan Dillon to the blue line. I think that helps them as well. I think they were able to increase the skill and the size of that blue line to get it ready to play in this division. What I think also helps defensively is one of the better 2-way forwards in the league, and PL Dubois is going to finally get a full season there. I think that is going to be huge. Getting to see him play a full season in Winnipeg, start to finish, without all the drama that he faced last year and without the health issues that he faced last year. I'm excited to see that. And then, of course, you have everybody that's been there before. Blake Wheeler, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Nikolai Ehlers. You have Andrew Kopp, Adam Lowry. These guys are all extremely talented players, and they're all very dangerous players in the NHL. So yeah, I'm very high on the Winnipeg Jets right now. I truly am. And I think that is a team that is going to make a lot of noise in the regular season. That is a team that's going to make a lot of noise in the postseason. And everywhere I've been that I've talked about the Winnipeg Jets, I've mentioned this small tidbit. 3 of the last 4 years, the Winnipeg Jets were eliminated by a team that went to the Stanley Cup Finals. I'll say that again one more time. 3 of the last 4 seasons, the Winnipeg Jets were eliminated by a team that went to the Stanley Cup Finals. When you think about that and you realize that they really don't lose to a team unless they're a very, very talented team, at least not as of late, and you look at what they added and you look at what they have and you look at which division they're in, I think this division plays right into the way the Winnipeg Jets want to play hockey. I think besides the Colorado Avalanche, the Winnipeg Jets have the most lethal offensive threat. As far as forward units, they're one of the most lethal offensive teams in this division, behind the Avalanche. And while we're at it, I guess we'll talk about the Colorado Avalanche. Clearly, going into this season, they're the best team in this division because they were the President's Trophy winners last year. They bring back Gabe Landeskog, get him signed. They do give up a little bit, and the big question is going to be in net. You lose Philip Grubauer, he goes up to play for the Seattle Kraken expansion team. But you add a guy like Darcy Kemper. Now, is it a risk? A little bit. Do I think it is a downgrade? A little bit. But I still also think that Darcy Kemper, the past couple of seasons, has been an extremely talented goaltender that's put up extremely good numbers on a team that has not been so good in the Arizona Coyotes. So I'm intrigued to see what happens for Darcy Kemper on a team this talented. They also lost guys like Brandon Saad, who I said went over to play for the St. Louis Blues. They lost Jonas Donskoy in the expansion draft. And they had to trade Ryan Graves for pennies on the dollar to the New Jersey Devils. But I still think, looking at this defensive core, that this is one of, if not the best defensive cores in the NHL right now. Obviously, you lead it off with Cale Makar. Offensively gifted, amazingly gifted skater, and just an overall stud in Cale Makar. You also have Eric Johnson, underrated in my opinion, but still a pretty stout defensive defenseman. You have Samuel Girard, Devon Taves, Ryan Murray, Bowen Byram. Those guys, especially Bowen Byram, I mean, a little bit more experience for him. This could be his breakout season where he shows everybody exactly why he was so highly touted in the draft a couple years back. And that's the defense. That's without even getting to the fact that they still have Landeskog after they retained him and signed him to a new deal. They still have Mikko Rantanen. They still have the second best player in the NHL in Nathan MacKinnon. The list goes Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon. And that is massively important. Their depth is not where it has been the last couple of seasons because of the players they lost. So they're going to need a player like Andrei Burakovsky to take a step. They're going to need Nazem Kadri to be at the top of his game. They're going to need a guy like, Valery Nichushkin to take a step forward, to step into a bigger role, to score a little bit more. But I still think this team, when you look at it, this team is comparable to any team in the NHL right now. The top-end talent, the depth on the defensive side, and the ability of Darcy Kemper, although we don't know how he's going to play with this team, the ability that we've seen of Darcy Kemper, plus the backup like Pavel Francouz, this team is still the class of the Central Division. Not surprisingly. Something I'm very much looking forward to this year when I look at the Colorado Avalanche, when I'm going to be watching them, I want to see what Alex Newhook does with a little bit more experience under his belt now. I'm excited to see what he does. Last year, he did not get a lot of playing time. He was not able to get too many reps in the COVID-shortened season. I do want to bring up all of his stats here in a second. Yeah, he only played in 6 games last season. During the regular season. 6 games, 3 assists. So I'm excited to see what happens whenever he gets the chance to come up and play. Colorado Avalanche losing that forward depth. It's going to be important for them to have a guy like Alex Newhook come up and take the spot of a guy like Brandon Saad. Take the spot of a guy like Jonas Donskoy. And they feel like they expect him to do so. But that is going to do it for today's episode of the Hockey Hotbed. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. That is our Central Division preview. It's going to be an interesting division. The Blackhawks are going to be interesting. I mean, the Blackhawks, the Stars, and the Blues are all going to be a mishmash down there. I think the Wild are going to be able to separate themselves from that group. I think the Jets will definitely be able to separate themselves. And I wonder if they take a step back, and if they do, how big of a step back do the Colorado Avalanche take? That's the big question. But like I said, that is going to do it for this episode today. We're getting so close to the NHL regular season. Training camps are fully underway now, so a little bit more news coming across the wire. We still have 3 RFAs left to be unsigned, so maybe they'll get signed, and I'll get to talk about them by the next time I come to you here next Tuesday. That's Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, and Brady Tkachuk. But as of right now, I'm going to sign off and say that I will see you guys next week. Have a great weekend, hockey fans.